You've probably heard of the phrase dumbing down. I first heard it, I guess, in the early 80s. And it was a time when culture, sort of popular culture, television and books and film, they started to degrade. They started to target people as if they were around 13 or 14 years old. And it was a way of trying to establish a kind of mass audience by not being too elitist. Prior to that, the BBC and other broadcasting organisations and publishers and filmmakers, they kind of felt that they were there for other reasons than pure kind of entertainment and numbers, numbers of viewers, numbers of readers. They felt they had a moral purpose as well. It sounds a bit stuffy, but there was this idea that they wanted to, if not educate, they wanted to kind of inform, they wanted to express something creatively. And then around about mid-80s, something happened, and there was a kind of change in attitude. And it's been kind of well documented as to why this happened and when it happened, and I'm not going to go into that. There's been lots of actual academic papers written about it. But you know, the price of producing stuff meant that the commercial aspect had to be the priority. You know, to how many people can we sell this? Can we guarantee selling this? I mean, take publishing, for example. You might be old enough to remember when a new novel came out by somebody like Martin Amis or somebody, it was actually a big event. You know, it was the equivalent of sort of, well, maybe when The Clash brought out their album, or Nevermind the Bollocks came out, or, you know, going back a bit further, maybe when The Wall came out, that people would be queuing to buy that album. People would be queuing to buy the Martin Amis book. They would fly off the shelves and it would be in all the papers and he would be interviewed. It was rock and roll. Now there's only a handful of people who make money in the UK, for example, out of writing books. Probably just about 10 or 12. Most of authors have to supplement their income in some way. And you end up with having people like Katie Price, who is for those that don't know, I don't know who she is. I mean, she's a kind of glamour model, I suppose, a kind of high-profile glamour model. I mean, she's well past her prime now, but people like her, who obviously could not string two sentences together and had ghostwriters, were able to, you know, get their sort of biographies published. And I think she published, I think, 3 or 4 biographies in a couple of books. And the fact is that a publisher knew that because of her profile and because even like previously respected newspapers like the Telegraph or the Independent or the Guardian and had turned basically into kind of celebrity lifestyle magazines. Yes, they've got a couple of news stories, but generally, again, since about the early 90s, they have declined into lifestyle magazines, really. To try and broaden their readership and what have you. And people like Dan Brown, okay, who would write a book with sentences like "the tall man got into the white car and drove away." People like him would be very successful, even though there was absolutely no literary value whatsoever to his work. And then other writers, going back a bit further, like B.S. Johnson, who was an experimental British writer, he cut his wrists and died of suicide in a bath because he knew that despite the energy and the creativity and the desire to communicate in his work, nobody was ever going to read his stuff. So dumbing down has always been sort of part of the process to which I've been at odds with, really, and like a lot of people. And I feel that I'm in a very small minority now of people, and of course I'm going to be accused of being snobbish, of being, I don't know, sort of intellectual or something, because the fact is that I still think that programs like In Our Time on Radio 4 and the last few areas where there is quite serious programming, I feel it's sad that that's nearly all gone. And of course Radio 4 and BBC will go quite soon, and that will be the end of it. And what are we left with? We're left with the sort of things that you scroll through on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and where else, things that pass the time and are distractions, but they have no nourishment whatsoever. And of course, Peter Zapp, the Norwegian philosopher, wrote extensively about this 60, 70 years ago. The idea that the human could not look life in the face anymore and had to distract him or herself. And that's what we do now. I mean, I don't have to tell you. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen me going on about how people just, are staring at their phones in the park and they don't even look at their own children. So what kind of shone a light on this? Because I'd forgotten about dumbing down, because as I said, it was something that was talked about in the 90s. But I was on YouTube, and I noticed that, have you heard of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen? He was a composer, a 20th century composer, German. And he wrote an opera called Licht that was 29 hours long. An extraordinary feat. It took him 26 years to complete this opera. I mean, whether you enjoy his music or not, you've got to admit that that's one hell of a feat to devote yourself to something. I personally think that it's extraordinary achievement. And I noticed that somebody had posted one of the movements from this called Octophony, and it was about 40 minutes long, and I think they posted it 12 years ago, and it's garnered about 3,000 views or something and 34 comments in 12 years. And then I noticed that Michael Barrymore, who is the disgraced ex-TV personality, who was the biggest TV personality, wasn't he, of the 90s, I think. But then somebody was found dead in his swimming pool, and things went downhill from then. And he kind of ekes out a living now, sort of going into the streets of his local town and trying to get people to recognise him. And when they recognise him, he kind of does the act. And they film this, and he goes into shops and he buys things like candy and, like a packet of sausages. And he films him doing it. And then there's a narration afterwards saying, I went into Sainsbury's and I bought a Curly Wurly and I bought a Mars bar and then I bought a packet of Walker's salt and vinegar crisps. And, he holds up the crisps to the camera. I don't know, I don't get it, but, But I noticed that in his latest video, in comparison to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's 29-hour, 26-year piece of work that was put on YouTube and has gone at 3,000, I noticed that Michael Barrymore's uploaded video of him buying bananas from Morrison's had garnered about 50,000 views in about 10 minutes. And I thought, well, this has to be symbolic of a total and utter cultural decline. I mean, there are many other examples, even in the last 20 years. Look, in 2001, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant put together The Office, one of the most subversive programs that have been made in modern times. It subverted office life, didn't it? It was funny as well. 20 years later, he's making Afterlife. He's making Afterlife for Netflix, for tens of millions. A series which is a sort of basically sentimental claptrap. You know, you can see his kind of fall from those early kind of that early creative drive into this pandering to the lowest common denominator. Because now everything is written for a 14-year-old. There are no programs on TV, are there, like Arena? Does anyone remember Arena? The South Bank show? It's just pure reality, isn't it, really, wall to wall? If you actually look. If you look at the schedules, you know, across from whether it be Netflix or Channel 5. And as for dramas, and knowing people who write for TV, I can tell you that they will not get anything commissioned unless there is a murder in it, and hopefully 2, or preferably 3. The more murders there are, the higher the chance of a commission. We're a very long way, aren't we, from those old Play for Todays that used to be on BBC Two, the kitchen sink dramas about real life, exposing real things. Everything now has to be a kind of version of Midsummer Murder. There's no intellectual challenge anymore. There's an atrophying, isn't there? As I said, even broadsheet newspapers are now just places where you can read about celebrities. Most of the Daily Mail headlines, if you look down the right, are about celebrity women, with headlines like Jennifer Lawrence shows off her ample assets. I don't know what happened to women's liberation and the women's movement and feminism. It ain't there. I don't know how much of this is to do with the Americanization of culture. I like to blame the Americans for most things. But it's interesting how the French have tried to prevent the Americanization of France with their cultural exceptionalism. In other words, they have quotas on how much American garbage is allowed to appear on their TV and how much crap AI-generated American music is allowed on their radio stations. Whether you agree that or not, I don't know. Maybe it's too much control, but nevertheless, French see it as a threat. They don't want to dumb down their population. They've got very high academic standards. This is a virus, actually. This is a virus. It's telling us what we need and giving it to us to the point where we are no longer able to differentiate between what's good and what's bad. In fact, we're told we're not allowed to do that anymore. We're not allowed to talk about what's good and what's bad because that is a kind of, well, it's kind of snobbish. It's kind of elitist. But this virus is making us moronic. It's banal, trivial, pointless and worthless. Now, I'm not saying that I don't watch this kind of stuff. I do. I've watched all episodes of Love is Blind UK and Love is Blind America. I do it very consciously because I can't think of a better way of escaping from a rotten old world. A world that I don't recognise anymore. For all the reasons I've said in all the other videos I've done. So yeah, I am a mass consumer. But I'm conscious that I'm doing it as a form of distraction. I'm distracting myself because I can't cope with 24/7 bullshit. And so I watch Love is Blind. And now AI is taking over in, for example, the music industry. So the idea of the great lyricists, the Bob Dylans, the Doors, the Van Morrisons, or the great musicians like Hendrix, that's all gone, that's all history, you know. And there's no coming back from it. You lived during a rich time. If you lived in the 60s and the 70s, and even at the beginning of the 80s, that was a rich time, and it's gone now. I'm not saying that was the only rich time, but that was the kind of the beginning of the end of it. Truth is now a matter of opinion. We're not allowed to discern truth, just like we're not allowed to discern what is good and what is bad. We should be standing up and saying this is garbage, but we can't. And our lives have been made so miserable by the pressures we're under now that no wonder we retire, you know, to watch people having dinner parties or whatever the other realities are, you know, reality TVs. So education is just about pure monetization. It's about just making a student into an economic unit. They're removing all the humanities. They're removing all of the subjects which taught us how to discern good from bad. Well, there's no point anymore because it's all bad. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, you know, in the dark corners and, you know, in the shadows, there are still people trying. Well, good luck to them. Because I've told you before, in the 70s when I was in the 80s when I was an artist and stuff, and I was surrounded by artists, we had freedom then. Housing was cheap, it was okay. You could find a way to do your craft and learn it. But now you can't. You've got to pay the bloody rent. You've got to pay €200 a month in energy costs. Transport, food prices are up 3 times. Can't afford to bloody sit in your room strumming a guitar. You've got to monetize yourself 24/7 or you will end up in the gutter. Am I being elitist? I don't know. And with this has come a moral decline as well. And the moral decline has come because where are we learning what it is to be alive? Where are we learning it? Are we learning it from the songs of Neil Young? No. Are we learning it from the books by people like Dostoevsky and people like even like Spike Milligan? You know, I mean, all of these books that were satires on war or a sense of what happens to you if you err in a moral sense, and all of these stories, you know, they're not being published anymore. Not really. And if they are being published, it's very, very niche. Will Self recently just did a lecture, a few years ago actually, called The End of the Novel, where he kind of lamented the end of the novel. Even news reporting. Do you remember when the news used to be reported in a kind of long form to some extent? You know, and you'd read it in the newspaper and digest it, and it would have been considered. Well, now, of course, where everybody gets their news online, if a story's more than 15 minutes old, well, it's old news. If it was uploaded 20 minutes ago, forget it. The world's changed since that upload. Nobody can cope with this. Nobody can cope with this. And it's the same with films as well. Where is the nourishment in the films that we're getting at the moment? You know, nobody would make a film like Stalker or The Shout anymore. Now, you might not know those films. You might do. But you might have come across films that you have watched when you were younger, when people were still making good, interesting films. And that they somehow... They nourished you. They changed your identity to some extent. They kind of helped you understand some of the mysteries of life. And so back to Barrymore's bananas. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, who are you to say this, that, and the other? Well, I'm not, but I do believe that watching Michael Barrymore buy a bunch of bananas from Morrison's, whilst a good distraction from the evils and horrors of the world, is not going to nourish you in any way and make tomorrow a better place for you. That's what I think. Whereas, dare I say this, I'll risk it. Whereas, if you put on your headphones and you listened from start to finish to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's movement from his 29-hour opera, the one called Octophony, I wonder whether at the end of that, you might be slightly better equipped to deal with tomorrow than you were before you listened to it, in some way that I can't explain. I know what you're all going to do now. You're all going to rush off, aren't you? And you're going to go and watch Michael Barrymore buy his bananas.